All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Beyond Baroque. Thanks for being here. My name is Quentin Ring. I am Beyond Baroque's executive director. I think I know everybody here now. We just met. But welcome to the Wanda Coleman Theater, and we're really thrilled to have John O'Kane with us this afternoon, a very good friend of Beyond Baroque, great Venice writer in exile these days, but I'm glad to have him back here in Venice. Before I just jump into the program, I want to say a few words. I think it's important to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence here on Tongva land. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their land. And as an arts organization, Beyond Baroque is committed to uplifting indigenous writers and communities. I think, as many of you know, we are very much a space and a community dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language. We offer workshops, including our free Wednesday night workshop, which has been running continuously since 1969. And we offer a reading and performance series right here in this theater. We have about 100 events a year, which means we have usually at least a couple weekends, a couple programs every weekend. We do have a couple things coming up that I'd just like to flag for you. This year, 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And so we'll be having a few programs around that anniversary this year. The first of which is next Saturday, February 15th, which is a group of writers from the Vietnamese diaspora, including Viet Thanh Nguyen, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, May Elliott, the artist An Le, and the poet Lan Duong will be here just to talk about the legacy of the war in the Vietnamese diasporic community, what it means to be an artist in that community, and thinking about their relationship to Vietnam and to the United States as well. So please come back for that. On February 21st, we have a program focused on Polish poetry and translation. The Polish poet Krzysztof Sivczek will be here, as well as his translator, Piotr Florczek. Should be a really interesting program. Also, got plenty more coming up as well. Check out our website and our social media. Just come back and spend some time with us. We do appreciate the support of our community. As I think everyone is aware, there are a lot of bad things happening in regards to arts funding and all kinds of other funding going on nationally right now. So we do depend on the support of our members, particularly at this time. I know many of you are supporters of Beyond Baroque. I thank you for that. If you're not a member and you'd like to become one, it costs as little as $60 for a senior membership. 75 is a regular, 100 is a dual membership. You can see Genesis in the bookstore, excuse me. You get into all of our events for free. We often charge for events. This one was free. You get a discount on our bookstore, you get a discount on our workshops, and you help keep the space going. I don't think I'll say too much more other than to thank our man in the booth, Eric Alberg, as well as our staff, Yvonne Salinas, Jimmy Vega, Genesis Perez for all their work. And otherwise, I think I'll just like to introduce John, and we can get to the reading. John O'Kane is a novelist, journalist, and publisher. He's the author of 8 books, 2 of literary journalism, 3 collections of essays, 2 collections of short stories, and 1 novel. His essays, articles, and stories have appeared in the Huffington Post, CounterPunch, Musing the Masses, and the Boston Globe, in addition to various creative and scholarly publications. Possessing a doctorate in literature and a master's in sociology, he has taught at USC, UCLA, MIT, and UIC. A longtime resident of San Pedro, California. He's the publisher and editor of AMASS Magazine, and he is here to read from his new book, The Accidental Jesus, which we have for sale in the bookstore. I am really looking forward to hearing the reading, and thank you for being here, John. So please, everybody, welcome John O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Quentin, for that. So thank you, everybody, for coming and foregoing the, I guess, the pre-Super Bowl parties. Or I guess we could call this Super Satire Saturday, I guess. And it is a satire. And although a lot of people don't see it that way, so I hope the marginally employed hitmen from San Pedro don't feast on me, whatever. So, so just a few things about what went into the book, kind of personal stuff, and kind of the rant that I put in here, and then also some of the intellectual things that I've been studying for years that I put into the book as well. And so it's a book that deals with Catholicism. It's a satire of Catholicism. San Pedro, which is a very Catholic town, incredibly Catholic town, founded by the Italians years ago, and very, very strictly on the side of the Pope. And the book is dedicated to the Pope. So it's not, the main character isn't me. I made the main character up, but there's definitely some personal things in the book. So I'd say the overriding purpose of writing the book was to sort of capture the feel of what it's like to grow up Catholic. What's it like to grow up Catholic? Is anybody Catholic in here? Nobody ever admits it anyway, but anyway, I've got that completely out of my system by now, but anyway. So what does it feel like to grow up Catholic, being watched 24/7 by a force, a person, a spirit of some kind? What does that do to your vision of the world when you're a young person? the issue of sin. There's a lot of things in the book about relative morality versus absolute morality that I got from Nietzsche. I'll come back to that. So growing up with that, that what sin is and trying to conform, be a good person, at the same time trying to grasp the meaning of what your burgeoning urges are all about, with the lack of a reasoning power to understand all of that. Priests, there's a lot of issues of priests in the book. One thing about growing up Catholic, the males are pressured very strongly to go into the priesthood, and girls into the convent as well. So, that was one of my fantasies early on. Definitely, I'm a very devout person. I was in the altar boys and everything, and but that changed in early puberty. In early puberty, I started to get into other things. I got involved in creative chemistry and found out how to make bombs. And I started blowing things up, no people or anything like that. Perfect candidate for the trenches in Northern Ireland, perhaps. But eventually started to read a lot of different books, a lot of different Bibles, and gradually moved away from that indoctrination. I think indoctrination is a fair word about what it's like to grow up Catholic. No question about that. And then I was deposed from being president of the altar boys because I had the audacity to go early into the sacristy and sample the wine. So that was kind of the end of that. Anyway, so very strict upbringing. So many from my class went into the priesthood or the nunnery. But so many of them as well came out and did like the opposite of what they were doing in those enclaves. So they had a lot of dropouts, profligates. A lot of nuns became strippers. So it's interesting. I think the conditioning of Catholicism, being very strict and everything, but what happens is that you tend to rebel from it and kind of gravitate to the opposite direction and become very, very crazy sometimes. So it's hard to get out of your system, no question about it, but I did. I definitely did. So intellectually, a couple of different things kind of feed into the work. One is the influence from Nietzsche, and the other one is from liberation theology. The liberation theology, kind of left-wing Catholicism, I guess, something like that. The idea that the whole point is to model your life on Christ's life, and to not be so absorbed by the literalness of the Bible, and to go out and try to do good things for people, put into practice the ideas in the Bible, rather than simply trying to convert people to go to Mass on Sunday, whatever. So I was very, very attracted to liberation theology early on. John Paul II, Pope John Paul II died in 2005. And I sort of followed a lot of what he had did over the years. And I put together a piece that I published, actually published only about 7 or 8 months ago, but I had many drafts before that, called Snookered Calculus, which is my version of my account, kind of my memoir about growing up Catholic and trying to figure out a lot of the doctrinal contradictions in the religion. And I actually got in contact with the people that around him in the Vatican. They were excited about the work. They invited me to the Vatican, and we had a very good relationship with that. The Nietzsche component, in the beginning, my intent was to kind of write a Thus Spake Zarathustra story. And there's no question that there's a lot of elements from that book in my book. Some of the main things I took from Nietzsche, his character types. What are Christians and Catholics? Of course, back then it's just Christians. What are Christians really like? The way they defer to authority, the way they turn the other cheek, the way they think metaphysically. So a lot of that is factored into the main character, Fred. Of course, Friedrich Nietzsche, Fred. The ending of the novel conforms very closely to what happens in the Thus Spake Zarathustra book as well. So the book itself, just a brief sum. It's a complex book with a lot of layers, but I'm going to try to give you just a simple summary of what happens in the book. So the main character comes back to a reunion after many years and finds the world forever changed. It's not like what it was 30, 40 years earlier. And one of I should mention as well, the book begins with that reunion. And my own experience of going to reunions fed into this as well. One of the things I did, one of the influences was Springsteen's song, The Glory Days. If anybody's heard that. The Glory Days, about going back to reunion, nobody looks the same, and so forth and so on. In fact, early drafts of the novel were on HuffPost, entitled The Glory Days. So he comes back to his hometown. Everything's different. He graduates from Bible college, conservative Catholic, had done a little bit of social activism in Mexico. He comes back and nothing's the same. And he meets up with a former girlfriend in a bar. He calls her up while he's at the reunion, calls her up, and they meet at this bar. And she comes dressed like a nun, invites him to her place, says she got divorced, and then shortly thereafter, her husband breaks in, and he's dressed like a priest. And he chases the main character throughout the city, and the main character, Fred, finally escapes him. From that point on, he's constantly on the run. There's a sense that he's kind of paranoid about being attacked or followed throughout the story. But he's on the run, and while he's on the run, he meets 4 different groups that influence his transformation. His transformation is about he's having difficulty with his faith. He's trying to get it back. He's constantly trying to get a priest to hear his confession. He doesn't know if he can hold on to his faith. And so he runs into a lot of different groups that have a big impact on that transformation. One of them is a group that social activists who squat in the Catholic Church and to protest the way the institution wastes a lot of money on the wrong things. And they do a lot of nasty things in this particular church. So he runs into them. He runs into a group that's constantly chasing him down and trying to cut his hair because he doesn't look like a Christian. He looks just like the historical Jesus. He runs into two women who follow the philosophy of Mary Magdalene, trying to put together a reformed Christianity that's more about the influence of women in it rather than just men and males. And another group that he runs into is a group of evangelical people who actually they do their business in San Pedro every weekend. They're out there with their placards. Jesus saves, the Messiah is coming, and the whole works. So he runs into that group, and they see him, and they think he is the returning Messiah. And they stalk him around throughout the town. And in the interchanges with that particular group, the main character, Fred, becomes Jesus in a sense. I mean, he starts to process thoughts from them and other people to get more deeply into the doctrine of the Catholic religion. And so he eventually becomes Jesus. People call him Jesus and so forth. So so all that movement around town, being chased, bumping into these different groups that have a big impact on him, eventually, in the protest in the church, there's a fire that starts. The church starts on fire, and that fire spreads, and eventually spreads throughout the city. So Fred, the main character, the two Magdalenian women who he met up with, and another character by the name of Alfred, who kind of represents the thoughts of St. Peter. They gather together, escape the city, and go to Signal Hill and watch it burn, ponder what's happened. Jesus finally decides to descend from Signal Hill back to San Pedro to find out what he missed, to re-experience so much stuff that he did not experience in the first place. And that's the ending. There's many possible interpretations of that ending. And they also decide when they're there to try to put together a new religion based on liberation theology. And so they decide they're traveling around in a van, so they decide to take off away from the area. So that's basically the story. The chunk of the book that I'm going to read from, chapter 8, is right after he leaves. He gets away from the church finally. He comes out of the church where the protest is happening. And then he sees the evangelical group. And they bow down thinking he's Jesus. They chase him all the way downtown to a bar. And then he goes into the bar. And many of the different elements of the story come together in this particular chapter. And this is the Charles Bukowski chapter. Charles Bukowski, of course, he's been dead for 30 years, but he had a big influence on San Pedro. And so Bukowski's in the bar. He first comes in to escape from the group, goes into the bar, and then he gets a very strange reaction from different people in the bar. They ask him, does he have a job? You should go get a haircut, and a lot of other things like that. But then finally, this is on page 144. He confronts a guy who's sitting in the corner taking notes and drinking, which is Bukowski. And I have a strong connection with Bukowski before he died. I reviewed one of his books, Hollywood. It came into my magazine. And it's written by somebody else, and we're getting ready to go in a couple of days to press. And it was just a terrible review. We couldn't publish it. So overnight, I rewrote it. I rewrote the review, made up a name for the author, published it, never read the book. I never read the book Hollywood. A year later, I got a letter from a New York press. They wanted to reprint it in an anthology, and they paid me $1,000. I never even read it. Never even read the book, but I got a letter from Bukowski. And he says, well, you see the world like I do. I want you to interview me. And we had a real nice interchange. He sent me tons of poems to publish, which I did. And unfortunately, he died like, I don't know, a week or two before we were planning to do the interview. So anyway, and living in San Pedro, so many people know about Bukowski. I originally did a piece on him called Joints back in, God, it's been about 10 years ago now. And I went around to all the bars in San Pedro. At that time, they had a lot of hardcore bars. Like they're open until like 4 a.m. and this kind of thing. And people come early on and pop down about 4 or 5 shots. And anyway, so that's the kind of place that he hung out. And of course, they made a film about him called Barfly back in the 80s. And so I sort of went through these bars and got some reactions to Bukowski from various people. Many of them never heard of him. Some did. So I pulled together a pretty good story about him. And then his wife still lives in San Pedro. And I had his address and everything and his phone number. So I called her up and told her what I was going to do, and she threatened to sue me. Because she said, Hank never set foot in any bars after we moved to San Pedro in 1978. So, yeah. So I had to change it all around and say, well, Linda Bukowski says this, blah, blah, blah. So I wouldn't be sued. Anyway, so I make this up. I make up his character here. But many of his ideas expressed in this particular chapter are valid based on my interchanges with him. In this chapter, he is a post office worker that comes into the bar, and he has his uniform on, and his name is Buck. So here we go. So the main character, Fred, is already in the bar, having hidden from the evangelical group that's been chasing him. In the next booth, there's a stocky gentleman who seems fixated on a napkin. I crane and see that he's writing some notes on it, so fully absorbed that he could be in a trance, barely even flinching at the trebly uptick from Mr. Paycheck. Music on the juke. He's wearing a postal worker uniform with a name sewn on the shirt. It looks like Buck. And the point of this is that Bukowski becomes kind of an anti-priest, which he definitely was. He now moves the napkin slightly in one direction and then another, positioning it in a brighter spot, and resumes his note-taking. After a minute or so, he pinches another napkin from the pile and grips his pen more tightly, as if an intensified mental acuity has been conducted to his hand. A quizzical smile begins to form on his thick lips, and he reaches for a tall glass of beer on his left and inhales a healthy swallow before plucking a full shot glass on his right and throwing back a good portion of its amber contents. The swallow produces an extended pause that scatters his concentration. He jerks in my direction like he's just become aware of my presence, but instantly returns to his task. I don't want to intrude, this is Fred speaking, but what are you working on? I say to apparently deaf ears, his expression grooving into a new form of heightened seriousness. I apologize, didn't mean to, that's Fred again. I hear a few snickers from the other side of the bar. Don't mind him. This gets to the the way people reacted, realistically reacted to Bukowski in these bars. Don't mind him, says the bartendress, who's now sitting on a stool with her back to the bar. He sits there night after night and laughs at himself and gets loaded and destroys our napkins. He just doesn't want to go home to his wife, adds another male mystery voice from the shadows, who then begins choking on his own chortles. A 40-something male wearing a Union Power tee and a Trojan's cap bursts through the front door and quickly closes it, taking a deep breath. There are some strange people outside, he announces. They're screaming and screaming, and they got these signs I couldn't read. He remains in front of the door like he's prepared to block anyone who comes through, but finally grabs the nearest stool. Buck continues piling up notes. So it's just back and forth with Buck all the way through this. It's probably just some of those teetotalers, says the bartender, who's apparently taking a break from storytelling. They ain't got nothing better to do than try and stop people from having a good time. Nah, these are different. They got something else on their minds and have funny looks in their eyes. Boy, do they ever. There's a bunch of them out back, too, a young male voice screams from the rear. I asked them if they wanted to come in, but they just stared at me. He surfaces from the shadows and takes a stool at the end of the bar. I look at Buck, who's unfazed by the discussion, and realize now that I might be trapped. He's worried about them coming in and taking him out. If they don't want to come in, they got to be them wacko teetotalers who want to make us a dry town again, says the bartender. The bartender scampers to the front door and opens it a crack. It's strange, they don't seem to notice me. I could swear they're looking beyond me. She closes the door. Maybe they're zombies who feed on alcohol-soaked bodies to keep going, quips the chortler. It kind of looks like the group that blocks traffic up on First and Gaffey, which they are, every week or so, as the Trojan cap. But it's larger, and the people seem like they're more motivated, more focused. On what? Asked the bartenders. They probably just need a good snort. Maybe we're prisoners, inserts the young male voice from down the bar. One of us should try to leave and see what happens. I watch Buck's concentration flag slightly as he snickers, as the snickers smolder in retreat to the silence of liquid comfort. Is he thinking about the crowd outside, the scene inside? Willie Nelson sends my thoughts elsewhere for the moment. A lot of country western music playing on the juke. And I consider offering myself up to the cause. What will they do with me if I walk through the door? As if he's been listening to my inner thoughts, Buck flinches and drains the rest of his liquid inspiration, letting his head fall down onto the leather curvature of the booth. He stares at the ceiling with a contented grin. What are you taking those notes for, I ask. Are you redesigning your mail route or something? His grin seems to metastasize, registering a satisfaction far removed from the sorting of delivery or delivery of letters and packages, and I grope for another angle. He's just a grumpy dude from the post office who thinks he's a writer, interjects the bartender. Some people had told me that. Buck gazes at the glass and jumps up from the booth like he's deaf to those words and shuffles to the bar. His mere presence there triggers the perfunctory fulfillment of his two favorite stimulants. He caresses them back to his cove and resumes his task. That's why he won't show us his scribbling, proffers a voice from the shadows. He's just a barfly. The speaker suddenly materializes into a wiry, Rasputin-like presence, squinting through round, rimless glasses. He's wearing a brownish khaki sports coat over a bowling shirt, and his long, unwashed salt and pepper hair is tucked back and hanging loose under a smudged beige cowboy hat. It's the professor, says the bartender, acknowledging the predictable appearance. He'll set everything straight. Buck slants a glance at him and tosses his finished napkin on the pile. The professor, who has just fingered scotch and water from the bartender, rushes to Buck's booth and plucks his latest creation. raising it in the air in a victory salute. So the professor becomes very critical of him, one thing after another. What is this, some kind of hen scratch? Are you taking notes about us? What are you saying? Who is this I? Buck is presumably listening, judging by the slant of his left eye, but he's already taken another napkin from the stash. You can't be a character using I. That's too out of date. You ain't no writer. You're a souse. Nobody could write something meaningful with all the booze in them. You ain't got no MFA degree. You ain't ever been to college. And you never give readings, which is true about him. Then a very interesting part of this. Bukowski moved to San Pedro because it's a working class town. He identified with the working class very strongly. Those of you who have read his books will immediately notice that. And so he just loved the working class, but they really didn't pay much attention to him. But anyway, this is what he says. Buck takes a healthy chug from his glass and flashes a sideways glance at his critic. You people are my family. This is my home. You're the best of society. I want to be around you. There's a God. He lives here with workers who have a privileged insight into ways of the world. You're his children. Professor stares at Buck like he's speaking in tongues. Fred says, a writer wearing a postal, this is what his inner thoughts, a writer wearing a postal worker's uniform who uses a place like this for his office and has a social conscience. I'm intrigued. Seeing him look up and away from his napkin, I seize the moment. This place stimulates you to write then? He peers in my direction, Bukowski, then returns to his napkin like he might not have heard me. But just as I prepare to pass a different salvo, he gives me a direct once-over. Just passing through, or are you in some local production of Jesus Christ Superstar? And how do you end up in a place like this? Smirking, he holds his glass like it's a dear companion. It partially obscures the right side of his face. Here's where I describe him. But the small-scale light on the wall gives off enough illumination to get a good glimpse of his asperous features. He has a goatee, but only the shadow of a mustache, and his short cropped hair accentuates an advanced widow's peak. His eyes are deep set and half closed, but scintillate with energy, and his persistent smile radiates the satisfaction of someone who has lived and prides himself on it. Fred responds, accidentally. I was trying to get away from those people outside, and I just stumbled in. I'm back from a high school reunion. Seems like I got diverted into some scenes I never expected to find. Buck, if you wander into the wrong scene in this town, you might get lost forever, but you're safe here. Fred says, as soon as the people outside are gone, I'm on my way. The professor appears to be straining to hear our conversation, gawking with a quizzical expression on his face as the remaining customers return to their slumbers. At the end of the bar, a young male slinks to the juke and plugs a George Thorogood song. What's it about them that bothers you? Buck speaking. They're probably only the bunch of hyped-up parishioners that float around town without a parish or church to practice in. They're out discovering new hotspots, hoping someone will come along who will deliver them from themselves. They're good at causing traffic jams. In fact, you look like you could be part of their club. Fred says, they were chasing me, but I don't know why. Their faces weren't exactly threatening, but that's not a very friendly homecoming, says Buck. Reunions, they're about something else anyway. You can't go home again. More comments from the professor here. Fred says, I've been chased ever since I arrived. A guy dressed like a priest followed me out of a house and down a hill, threatened to kill me. There are a lot of priests, Buck says this, there are a lot of priests around here these days, but more and more of them are ordained by imaginary institutions that want to bypass the real apocalypse, and they dress in clever disguises. Buck, the apocalypse is coming according to Fred, the apocalypse is coming according to the Bible. St. Peter wrote a book called The Apocalypse, and of course, St. Peter is San Pedro. It will never happen, says Buck. The apocalypse is nothing more than other people who misrepresent themselves. What are you guys talking about? Strains the professor. Back again. There's a cessation of sound. Then a lyric from the juke erupts about somebody's good buddy Wiser. That would be George Thorogood's line. These other people are God's children, I submit, and they always need guidance. Buck, who knows who their parents are, but one thing for sure is that what they need, no priest can give them. And they probably can't do much for us or anyone else either. You have to guide yourself through the real apocalypse to be saved. I'd like to think we can't do it by ourselves. I'd like to think we can do it by ourselves, but we can't, says Fred. Buck, if you have that attitude, you won't. Just learn to expose false priests and prophets, and the more victories you score, the more confident you'll get, and more suspicious about there being a big priest behind the whole mess. It's like learning how to play the nags at Hollywood Park, so I had to bring this in. You crunch all the variables, learn the good ones and the bad ones, and through a process of elimination, you arrive at greater and greater degrees of mastery to predict the outcomes. You don't need anyone else's help, and the more priests you expose, the less you need them. Back in the 1600s, there were witch finders employed by the church-owned governments who went around testing people to see if they were believers in God or agents of the devil. The latter, of course, were killed off. Instead of trying to shut down temples like this, opens his palms and pans the bar, the mayor should budget an army of priest finders so they can locate and test all the hucksters of metaphysical irrelevance and depose them. Our lovely town would become more spiritual before you know it. One of my favorite moments there. Wow, the logic of the racetrack and gambling and God, and well, our existence is a gamble? That's what Fred asks. And we shape its terms. When I start playing around with words, and this is something that he wrote me about, actually. When I start playing around with words and get the exact ones to say what I want to say, or some that lead me to think about something I didn't know I wanted to say, they open up a whole new range of possibilities. I feel sometimes I've drunk the insights of a Godhead. So writing in relation to spirituality, you kind of sound like a priest now, a rebel spirit who's searching for a new or different direction. Is there any chance you could hear my confession? So it's not, Fred is constantly trying to find somebody to hear his confession. He does finally get somebody to, actually. Actually, it happens in the church. I have no wisdom to offer anyone. You're an interesting breed of writer. He says, Buck, I'm a postal worker, a working stiff, and proud of it. Words just pop into my head when I'm here. Stories erupt. So this is where he wrote. I mean, he's known for, from the very beginning, when he lived in Hollywood, there's pictures of him with his big typewriter, and then on one side there's a shot glass, on the other side a glass of beer. He'd get off work at the post office, and then he'd get loaded, and he would write in that condition. Like forces speak through you and you respond. It's like spontaneous combustion, a big bang without a big cause. Now it shifts to the crowd outside. Not too much more to go. The front door burst open to a porcine blur of tattered leather, wearing dark sunglasses, fisting his helmet in rhythm to the music pounding on the juke. Keeping the door open, he begins to belly laugh and turns toward the bodies in the doorway, inviting them to enter. As a few customers edge closer, he slams the door and brandishes his presence, the tarnished iron cross around his neck, dancing in rhythm to his swaying gray locks. Somebody's old lady sent an escort or something? he sprays, sporting a rakish, yellowing smile. Break out the Kool-Aid. Hey, swine, what brings you in? Asked the bartenderess. I did a lot of research on bikers in Pedro because there was somebody with my name who was one of the principal bikers in the town who'd been a biker forever and ever. So I did a little research into that. Hey, swine, what brings you in? Asked the bartenderess. Thank you. Thought you was off on a run. Just got back, Mama. Good timing, too, 'cause Mad Dog says there's a bunch of hippies, heathens, atheists, and communists taking over our church up on the hill. They's desecrating it and doing lots of bad stuff inside. You hear the sirens? At this time, the church is already on fire. Buck slips back into his comfort level and grabs another napkin while the professor gets up from his stool and steps toward the rear, fidgeting. There are always sirens here this time of day, says the bartender. The cop's been trying to get them out of the church for a while, and Mad Dog and some of the others in the club want to give him a hand and stomp some heads. I'm doing some recruiting. Anybody want to rumble? We may need some of those wackos outside to get out of here, says the Trojan Cap. Anybody try to leave yet? Don't worry about that, says Swine. I'll get us through. Wonder why they're out there anyway, says the bartendress. Didn't seem like they're preventing anything. Maybe they're just watching somebody. Yeah, that's it, sends an anonymous voice from the shadows. Anybody been skipping their prayers lately? Buck flinches again, glancing in my direction. Use your charm, Swine, joins the bartender, and get them to go with you. Maybe they're really tigers and only need someone to bring it out of them. And it'd get them away from here, too. They're bad for biz. They'll probably be much happier around a church, too, asserts the anonymous voice, and maybe being around other religious types will help them get a church of their own. I'll take anybody that'll go. How about you guys there? You ain't going to let some hippie atheist disrespect our religion, are you? Sure that's what's happened, Swine? Asked the professor. Just accuses him of wanting to go bust heads. Yeah, when's the last time you went to church anyway, Swine? Asked the bartender. Yous guys, I grew up a few blocks from there, and I go every chance I get. I don't think too many go at all anymore, says the bartenderess. I'm not sure whose church it is. Who in here has gone to Mass in the last 6 months? She pans the bar, searching in vain for a show of hands. Maybe whatever these hippies are doing, there is a blessing. It might get the attendance up. I notice Buck refreshing his grin. It depends on what you mean, blurts Swine. I see a bunch of folks there when I go. Somebody else says for funerals. Swine again. Come on, you guys. You're just playing with me. Mad Dog is coming soon with some of the brothers, and they're counting on us. Let's. The juke drowns out the rest of Swine's words with Man in Black by Johnny Cash. A new voice from the shadows, which sounds like it belongs to an older female, shrieks, "Hey, turn that up!" The bartender obliges and turns the sound up high. Too high. Some plug their ears in protest, but he's zoned into the lyrics like a believer in the throes of Sunday go-to-meeting gospel rapture. The lyrics from the song. I wear it for the thousands who have died, believing the Lord was on their side. I wear it for another 100,000 who have died, believing that we all were on their side. Directly from the song there. Just about over. He turns slowly, almost sheepishly, then bows like he's the singer of this song, facing the customers with something resembling a sarcastic squint. I got my religion. He stares like he's awaiting an imminent ecstatic reaction, but their looks merely mimic his blank surprise, and the laugh that wells up through his body fizzles, delivering a lip-slapping spray that sends the Trojan cap below the lip of the bar. Buck perks up and empties his beer glass. Turn that twangy crap off, says somebody else. Let me get loaded in peace. Snickers of affirmation spread, and the bartender finally turns it down. As the room returns to the status quo. The professor slips back onto his stool and watches Buck's movements closely as the front door flies open. Mad Dog swaggers through the entrance towards Swine's open arms, followed by two companions, the first evidence of the group, the evangelical group, followed by two companions who take seats at the bar. We're ready to rumble, he shouts. You betcha, spews Swine, as a man and a woman slip into the door space and gawk meekly around, drawing his glance. Yous bring some new pals with you? Ain't nobody we know. What do you guys want? Follows Swine, suspecting they're from the crowd outside. You lost or something? The Trojan cap cranes to see the surprised guests that remain in the doorway, mute to the greeting like deer caught in the headlights. Others now follow his lead. You guys are in the wrong place, says the bartender. The mission's a couple of blocks over. The woman inches in front of the male and blinks into the lurid haze like her REMs are transitioning to toxic ticks. She's 50-ish, has medium-length, brownish-gray hair, whose style appears to be dictated by static electricity, and is wearing a bulky print dress that reaches nearly to the top of her sandals. Her zealous gaze roves the room as her eyes adjust to the conditions. He's a tall, slender, 20-ish male with horn-rimmed glasses and short, grease-backed, cowlicky red hair, wearing a dark suit with a narrow black string tie. His presence evokes a pubescent choir boy peddling Bibles door to door. Also apparently adjusting to the conditions, his eyes dart in random directions, giving his reddish complexion a somewhat menacing aura. You guys look like you need a drink, a good stiff one, says Swine. The woman steps further into the bar, wrapped with devotional flicker, and ignores Swine's invite to socialize. The male follows sheepishly. She glances toward me, and I slide slightly to the left, using the professor to shield me from view, as another male figure slips through the door, carrying a sign that reads, "He's come. He's come." I recognize him from the crowd outside the church earlier at the Sojourner, the name of the hotel he was staying in. He's followed by others who cautiously stream in, a few carrying other signs. A couple more pages. Hey, you bring in reinforcements, asks Swine. No one acknowledges the question. It's like they're waiting for a signal from someone. Buck grabs another napkin and works his fingers while glinting at the scene. The professor inches backward, buffering me further from view as I settle back. Hey, you with the sign, he gushes with a smirk. Didn't we chat last week? At first in Gaffey. The growth squirms and conforms to the beckoning look of their leaders. So it's the way I describe this group elsewhere as a growth. Can I see your IDs, hollers the bartender. Some of you don't look like you're old enough to be in here. What do you all want here? Snaps the bartendress. Buck suspends his note-taking and saunters to the bar for refills. Still oblivious, the two leaders turn and trudge through the bar, the growth in gleeful tow, like hosts extending their probe of new spaces and times. Mad Dog rushes alongside the growth. Talk to us, dudes, he snipes. You all want to help us get rid of some trespassers up at the church? Some hippies and atheists? That's where you guys ought to be hanging anyway. Cackles cascade through the bar and disappear in the repeating riffs of Merle Haggard as a few more bodies stream through the front door and affix to the growth. Hey, you guys got to leave, says the bartender, unless you want to order something to drink. The refusal to acknowledge the comment perks up Mad Dog Mad Dog's pals, and they pop up from the bar and slide toward the action with bouncer bravado. The rear door opens, and yet more bodies creep through to meld with the rest, sinking with its beatific gapes. "What do yous want here?" reiterates Swine, waving his arms wildly in the face of a freckled acolyte, getting nothing close to a flinch. "That's my neighbor," spouts the Trojan Cap. "She's always like that." "You going to take us prisoners?" blurts the professor, as Merle's melancholies twang to silence, the gap filling with whispers and some muffled laughter. "They're harmless," follows the bartendress. With a smirk, Buck pauses his note-taking with a grin. "Don't get near him, don't touch him," boomerangs a crackling voice as the bouncers brave to the edge of the growth. One of them grabs a sign-bearing woman from behind, but as she pivots sharply into the field of vision, she squirms and lets out a scream, drawing looks from the gallery. He sets her down immediately like she has some form of skin disease. With all eyes lasered on the unfolding spectacle, the bartender's subject bolts for the front door, bug-eyed, drawing the attention of the professor, who angles to his left for a clearer vantage. In the suspended silence, I squeeze through the vacated space toward the door and stop when I hear a rustling sound and glimpse the bodies descending to the floor, bowing from so that now they know that that's who they're looking for, and they bow down to him. He's now becoming Jesus. Everyone else follows the shifting spectacle stream, pinning me to the door's shadows. One more page. You're why they're here, who they want," says the bartendress in a self-satisfied tone as the bodies crowd closer to me. "You need to get out of here, now. You're like them. All of you need to go. Escort them out, Swine." "You guys want to order something before you go?" asks the bartender dryly, as Swine, who's leaning against the bar next to the Trojan Cap, nods to his bouncers that their task has changed, and they plod toward me. Stories told by Fred, first person. "Yeah, we could get them all out of here, this whole bunch of zombies," says Swine, belly sputtering a diabolic laugh. "They could run interference for us up at the church. What do you think about that?" He glares at the wiry, pubescent redhead, then the 50-ish woman, both consumed with their own private schemata, and then at his own choir beaming their instinctive assent. Bring him, spouts Mad Dog. "He looks like he's got to belong up here anyway. It looks like he's got to belong up there anyways, and maybe he could help us get close." He speaks through a pressured deadpan, successfully fighting off a gutbuster. Several bodies separate from the growth, as if the communications current linking its cells has short-circuited. One prostrate body belly crawls to within 5 feet or so of me, looking up in strained satisfaction before reversing its path back toward the others, which begin to reform the growth. I glance over at Buck's frenzied fingers. As if he feels the rays of my attention, he turns and hesitates before garnishing a slight nod with a rapid wink. "Don't fight it," he says, before flipping back to his napkin. He rises as if he wants to give a send-off. "Give them the priest test, and they'll never bother you again." The growth inches to within a few feet, urging me through the door as one of my folliculous friends slithers by on the right, peering in my direction. End. Sorry it's so long. So, anyway, so, is that too much?
No.
Another round of applause for John, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Please buy some copies in the bookstore. Feel free to hang out for a little bit. And if you want to come back next fall, we actually have some Bukowski content. We have some unseen photographs that will be on display in the gallery, I think in October or so. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
Christine.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah. You mean the growth? Don't you read it? You already read the book?
No,
Oh, okay.
just from what you said.
Yeah, well, there are a few that are kind of, that break away from the group and are different, but mostly they're just kind of a formist growth.
I thought the Jesus character
Yeah.
had developed because of the influence of the church.
No, good, yeah, definitely.
So I like that
Good
part of
point.
it. Thank you, it was very good.
Yeah, so if you live in Venice, what's the counterpart of this would be what? Hare Krishna, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, the group in San Pedro are Christians, a different religion than Christians, but they kind of all dress the same, kind of, bound up in this kind of bubble and don't really have much individuality.
But in a way, they're more conventional than the Hare Krishnas, I think, in terms
Definitely.
of being connected
No
to
question
the
about it.
worldwide philosophy.
Yeah, definitely. No question about it.
That was very good, thank you.
Oh, thanks. Bukowski's a fascinating figure.
One thing I admired about Bukowski
Yeah.
from my reading is the fact that he worked at the post office
Right?
and that he was able to have a day job which was responsible and still manage his art, his writing. And not everybody's able to do that. Some
Yeah,
people
yeah.
have to not have any day jobs to get it. But the fact that he would have the discipline to do both makes me respect him very much.
Yeah, and it's hard, it's hard to have a real job in the day and then have the energy to write
That's right.
at night as well. And that's what's amazing about him. And we published, there's a book that came out 6 months ago that I reviewed. It has everything he's ever written in it. It's like a 900-page book. And he published like 5,000 poems. Not many novels, I think 5 or 6. But just a real, it's amazing how he could, he was constantly drinking, but he could still, churn it out, and good work, and it made sense, and he got published.
Is he kind of the Bob Dylan of writers in a way?
Yeah, it kind of fits, yeah. Bob Dylan.
Kind of let it, and just kind of flow out with Bob.
Yeah, Bukowski didn't really participate in the literary culture much. He was just, he would go up, he'd be invited to a conference or something. He'd go up and he just, one time he opened up his zipper and just goes like this and walks off stage, and he never.
I know one person that went to a reading with him and he didn't do this. And so they were expecting him to read, and he just sat down on the floor and pulled out tape recorder and pressed play. And so that's the reading.
Did he play his own work?
Yeah, he recorded it out.
Yeah.
He was looking for the next drink.
Dylan was kind of like that too.
Yeah.
He was. Yeah, Dylan went to school at University of Minnesota when he went to grad school. A lot of stories about him. He just sang some songs at a venue and 4 people would come.
Yeah, but he didn't have
But suddenly it was like very famous.
this.
Yeah, sorry.
He didn't have a day job to manage like
No, I
Bukowski
didn't.
did. So
No, he didn't come from an affluent family, but he went to, he went to college at University of Minnesota, but he just never finished. We just kind of hung out, kind of like Bukowski, just spurning the institutions. Now Dylan got the Nobel Prize.
I like how you tied in, Fred, your experience of Bukowski with like,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I did that piece called Joints a while back, I got published in a Beat magazine. Anyway, his wife has just been a thorn in my side. Just, because I have tons of letters from him and everything. I said, "Do you want these for the archive and all that?" She won't even respond.
Is Linda?
Yeah, I mean, it's because she didn't want me writing that piece about Hank because she said he never said it for him anymore.
Total denial.
He's trying to whitewash his career.
No, because your friend side was very involved here, and Linda's a whole other.
Oh, so you know her?
I don't know friends side myself, but she was very involved here for a long time. Yeah.
A funny story, I talked to her on the phone, I'd never met her, and then one day I was in the post office, and I heard somebody talking. I know that voice from somewhere. And I just took a guess, it sounded like Linda Bukowski. She has kind of a distinctive voice. I turned around and said, "Are you Linda Bukowski?" She says, yeah. I said, "Well, I'm John O'Kane." She said, "No, the post office." But the piece I wrote was so positive about Bukowski, too. It's just very strange.
Yeah, so profound stuff.
Anyways, feel free to hang out.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks.